Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 11-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I will do this video for DraftKings and FanDuel. The FanDuel will be at the end, so do keep that in mind. And also, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to also check the description below for our Discord and for our YouTube memberships. Check those things out. With that said, let's get into the slate here. So we'll start with pitchers here on DraftKings. We're going to start with Lopez from Minnesota. For the price today, he's a solid option. He doesn't have a 30 fantasy point ceiling, but he's been pretty good lately, and he's only had a handful of floor games all year. He has had 2 games versus Kansas City as well, 14 and 28 fantasy points this season. His K rate is also solid, so I do think he's a viable option here. Some alternatives to him are Steele and Senga. Steele has 3 straight wins, though his K rate has not been as good as you'd like for a 10K plus option, but he is riskier than Lopez today, but he does have a good ceiling. As for Senga, Senga has some advantage because he has a decent floor. He's been inconsistent throughout the season, though, and I don't love the matchup today against Arizona, but he's definitely in play today. As the P2 options, we're going to start with Berrios, who's very similar to Lopez with a few more floor games on the season. He hasn't got many bad games this year, and he's got around a 22 to 27 fantasy point expected ceiling. His K rate isn't perfect, but he's in a good matchup here, and I like his upside. As for some alternatives to Berrios, Cobb, Lugo, Lynn, and Miller for the Dodgers are all in play. As for Cobb, the earned runs have kept him from scoring well in 5 of the last 7 games. He still has some upside, but he's high risk here. As for Lugo, he's got a 15 to 20 fantasy point game in him here, most likely. His K rate is low, but with the injuries to a lot of Angels, bats are a little bit more limited, and he has been somewhat inconsistent, but he's got some upside in this matchup. As for Lynn, he's capable of a good game here, though the matchup isn't ideal. He has a low floor, but he also has a good ceiling. It's a tough matchup against Toronto. Then for Miller for the Dodgers, he's facing Pittsburgh. In his first 4 games, he was really good. In the last 3, he's had a really rough time. His K rate has dropped off, and he's given up earned runs. The matchup does make it possible. He doesn't feel very safe. And I have some Hail Mary options, Bello, Soroka, Hauser, and Creamer. Now, Bello for Boston, Texas has a top-tier offense. Bello has only given up 3 earned runs or more in 3 of his 13 starts, and he has a good floor most of the time, though he does feel pretty risky. As for Soroka, he has started 3 games, and he gave up at least 3 earned runs in all of them. I don't know why the Braves can't shut down average teams, but dominate the good ones. I don't have a ton of hope that he will have a great K-rate game here, which gives him some lower upside as a result. But he is capable here, and Cleveland is not a very good team. Then we'll look at Hauser for Milwaukee. He has a 15 to 18 fantasy point game here. Though it's not out of the question, his K rate does make it hard to achieve, but it is possible, and he does have a decent matchup here. As for Creamer, he is facing the Yankees. He doesn't have a lot of security here. Not giving up. He doesn't have the normal security I like for guys that don't give up a ton of earned runs, but he does have a decent K rate, and sometimes it's up and down, though the Yankees are a mess, and that gives him some 15 to 20 fantasy point upside here. But he is high risk, high reward. So that's what I have for pitchers. Let's go and get into our bats here. Now I have 2 core plays, one of them being Ronald Acuna Jr. and the other one being William Contreras from Milwaukee. So we'll start with our catchers. And we're going to start with Will Smith here for the Dodgers, as he draws great metrics here for this game. He has home run upside at this position. The metrics are solid. His price is pretty high, but he should score some fantasy points, and it just depends on how many, if he pays off or not. As for William Contreras, who's my favorite play at this position, his metrics are off the charts today. He's also been hitting the ball well, even without a lot of home runs. He's had 3 straight 2-hit games, and he's in a great matchup here. You can also consider Adley Rutschman, John Murphy, Jonah Heim, Francisco Alvarez, and Danny Jansen at this position. Moving to first base, we'll start with Matt Olson. Now, Matt Olson has been averaging 15 fantasy points per game over the last 10. Many of those games are over 20 fantasy points. He has good upside and he's hitting for power with great metrics here. Atlanta's also a top-tier stack, though he's very expensive. Brandon Belt was very close to being a core play today. He has been up and down throughout the season, but some of the fantasy point games are in order here. Some good fantasy point games are in order here, and he has top-tier metrics for this game. I do really like him a lot here. He's also hit the ball really well recently. Then we'll look at Flores for San Francisco, who's just way underpriced. He's cheap, and if he starts, he has solid metrics. He doesn't play every game, so make sure he's in the lineup. But if he does draw the start, he's hitting the ball really well in that role. Also consider Pete Alonso, Nate Lowe, Ohtani, Joey Votto, and Vlad Jr. today. I'm not sure Ohtani's going to play, though, so do keep that in mind. Then we'll look at second base, and we'll start with Matt McLain. He's priced up a lot now, and he's harder to roster as a result. But he's had 6 games over the last 6. He's had 6 games over the last 10, over 16 fantasy points, and he's got top tier metrics today. He can also play shortstop, and so he's very viable here. Kim for San Diego is also in play. His price is up a little bit, but he's averaging 11.3 fantasy points per game over the last 10. He's incredible hitting metrics for this matchup. He's also a nice option for a San Diego stack as well if you were to go that way. He definitely drives some good opportunity there. You could also consider Ozzie Albies, Jonathan India, Marcus Semien, and Eduardo Julian here at this position. Moving to third base, we're going to start with Jose Ramirez for Cleveland. He draws a good matchup here against Atlanta. He hasn't had a big game in a week, but his matchup gives him upside, and he's due for a good one. He's also had solid metrics here, so I do think he's in play. Then we'll look at We'll look at Jameer Candelario for Washington. Now, he has had 16 or better fantasy point games over the last 10, and he draws great metrics here with a top-tier matchup. I really like his upside and home run potential. Elia De La Cruz is very difficult to roster today as he's $6,000. He can also play shortstop as well, and he has top-tier metrics for this game. Best WOBA versus pitcher of anyone on the slate. But he does have top-tier WOBA and home run upside as well as stolen base potential, though he does feel somewhat difficult to roster at this price. Moving to shortstop, we'll start with Mookie Betts here for the Dodgers. He's had 20 fantasy point games over his last 10 games, and he's hitting for power as good as anyone right now. His price makes him really hard to roster, but his matchup is solid for him to continue the onslaught. I also like Matt McLain and Elia De La Cruz here, which I already mentioned, and you could also consider Corey Seager, Francisco Lindor, Gunnar Henderson, and Carlos Correa at this position. Moving into our outfielders, this is where it gets crazy. So Ronald Acuna Jr. is a core play. Now, he's had hits in every game since 6/16/23, and he's been over 10 fantasy points in 13 straight games. This matchup leaves little doubt that trend will continue, as they have a fantastic matchup against one of the weakest pitchers on the slate. So I look for him to have a lot of upside. He's also stealing bases and hitting home runs. He's just a all-you-can-eat player. Mookie Betts can also play in the outfield as a top option. TJ Friedl for Cincinnati is also a top-tier option at $4,700. He is expensive, and due to his price popping up, but he is hitting well, and he draws a nice matchup here, though I don't think he's a must-play at this price, but he definitely has some viability. And then Tatis Jr. for the Dodgers, not for the Dodgers, for the Padres. He in 3 of the last 4 games, he's over 16 fantasy points. He's also done a lot lately by getting solid hits and home run and RBIs and stuff, even without a ton of home runs. Sometimes he is managed to score fantasy points, so I like his upside here. As for other guys you consider as a top-tier option, Lane Thomas, Kyle Schwarber, and Masataka Yoshida all draw some good utility here, though they are a little bit overpriced. Maybe into the cheap options, Brandon Belt, who I already mentioned, can be in the outfield as well. Brandon Nemo also draws really good metrics for this game. He's been hitting home runs with 5 over the last 7 games, and his fantasy output is popping. He's also capable of a good game without a homer as well, though I do think he needs to get a home run for his price. Ian Happ is in play for the Cubs. Now, he's underperformed this year, but he draws good metrics, and he's still capable of good games, though he feels riskier than he should, as he hasn't hit the home runs this season like we expected. Tommy Pham is also in play for the Mets. He's nice and cheap, and he's hard to ignore the fact that he's had 5 games over 7 fantasy points over the last 7 games. He's had 3 20-plus fantasy point games in that stretch. He's hitting well and scoring fantasy points, and he's dirt cheap. Really helps roster him here. Duran for Boston is in play. He's just so super cheap here, and he's been scoring fantasy points well when he leads off. And as long as he leads off, he will be very viable at this cheap price. He's had 3 straight 15 fantasy point games in a row as a starter, so he's definitely viable and has home run potential here. in this particular matchup. Dalton Varsho for Toronto has been in a slump, but his home run metrics are off the charts here, and he's worth a look, but he is high risk, high reward. And then Michael Harris is in play today. His price is rising, and he still didn't get a hit yesterday. This matchup today is very juicy though, and he's been hitting very well as late with 6 of the last 10 games, or 6 out of the last 9 games for over 10 fantasy points, so I really like his upside. You could also consider Starling Marte and Alex Verdugo at this position. Let's get over to our FanDuel picks here, and for pitchers, we're going to start with Pablo Lopez as our top overall option. He's just overall the best pitcher on the slate, and he is also one of the most expensive ones, so he is rosterable though, and you can fill him in good lineups as well with him in it. For an alternative is Jose Barrios. Is $1,200 cheaper, helps you pay up a little bit more around the bats, but there's plenty of value across the board. And if you want to go cheaper, you can go with Seth Lugo, who's in a pretty good matchup, and he's just a little bit cheaper than the top 2 guys. He's one of the cheaper good options on the slate on FanDuel. Moving to our catchers and first baseman here. So our top 2 options are Matt Olson and Freddie Freeman. Obviously fairly expensive and hard to roster, but you don't really necessarily need to roster those guys today, as you have plenty of value plays, and Brennan Belt, Nate Lowe, and Joey Votto. I think all 3 of these guys have a lot of utility on the slate and have viable upside. As for our second baseman, we're going to look at Mookie Betts and Ozzie Albies and Marcus Semien as our top expensive plays. I do like Mookie Betts a lot today, but he's going to be extremely hard to roster. Ozzie Albies is definitely more palatable at his price. As for Kim and Julian, are 2 cheap options, and I think Kim is a great option on the slate. He's a great option to throw in that utility spot too if you want to pay for Albies or something. Maybe in the third base, Jose Ramirez and Rafael Devers and Elly De La Cruz and Austin Riley are all top tier options on the slate for this position here. They're all similar price though, so it's going to be really hard to figure out who you want to roster. I would suggest if you wanted to use one of these guys, then stack the team that they're on. But otherwise, I'm going to look at Gunnar Henderson or Jamier Candelario or Kim from San Diego to be potential value plays at this position, and all of these guys have some good utility here. As for shortstop, we have a similar situation with Mookie Betts, Matt McClain, and Elly De La Cruz being all pricey. And then we have 3 good value guys with Gunnar Henderson, Francisco Lindor, and Carlos Correa. Lindor seems a little bit underpriced today, to be honest. Moving to the outfielders, Acuna, Mookie Betts, and Tatis Jr. are our top tier plays. Obviously very expensive and extremely hard to roster Acuna today, but he is viable. As for value plays, Byron Buxton's underpriced, as is TJ Friedl. Though Friedl doesn't feel as safe if he was more expensive, he does feel decent at this price. Jake Fraley is also available as his teammate in the Cincinnati stack. For the Mets, Brandon Nimmo is in play, and Ian Happ is also in play. Though both of these guys, do have some good hitting potential today. Yoshida is underpriced here on FanDuel, and so he's definitely a top tier option. With Jarren Duran, he could also become a good little 1-2 stack there. I also like Dalton Varsho, though he's been in a high risk, high reward situation because he's been in a slump. Tommy Pham and Michael Harris are very similar price, and I think both these guys have good home run potential today. And then Lane Thomas and Alex Verdugo are both underpriced for their potential in this matchup. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.